Good morning, everyone. First, I wanted to share how wonderful it is to be invited to such a beautiful city. It's a pleasure to speak with you here today. Do you have the slides? Do we have the slides? Yeah? Okay. Okay. Oh, there we are. My name is Alan Majer. I am CEO and founder of Good Robot, and I wear two different hats. First, as a researcher and writer. Second, I work with technology direct hands-on, often creating custom electronics and working on new product development. And frequently, I'll combine both with an eye to see where technology is going in the future, but trying to understand its business implications. That brings me to something that I really like doing most of all, talking to experts about the future. That's why I love this quote from Isaac Newton so much. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulder of giants. So today, I'd like to share a project by the Linux Foundation. It's going to be published next month, so you get an early peek at it, where I interviewed 25 interesting, different, and frankly, quite amazing people. Together, we can stand on our shoulders and peer a little further into the future. But before I do that, I want to share a quick personal story. So years ago, I saw a movie called The Martian, and if you've seen it, I'll try not to, or if you haven't seen it, I'll try not to spoil it for you. It's about life and survival in a harsh, highly constrained, narrow ecosystem, far away from Earth, out there in the vacuum of space, or on the harsh surface of Mars. And here on Earth, we don't have to try to grow things. Nature will simply take over if you let it. But in a confined space, it's different. So I watched that movie with my kids, and we got enthralled about the idea of growing plants in space. So we tried the next best thing. We tried growing plants in bottles, dozens of different bottles, different plants, soil, seeds, and sealed them all up. Now you might guess how this turned out. In highly constrained ecosystems, almost nothing survives. Almost everything withered, died, or turned into murky green goo. You need big, diverse ecosystems in order to support life. So don't lose hope. Life can be resilient too. This here is our triumph. It's the only plant that survived. We planted this one in February 2017, sealed it up, never opened it, never added water, and it's still sitting in my kitchen safe back at home growing just fine in Toronto, Canada. So you might be wondering, why am I telling you this story? I think there's a powerful analogy that we can make to today's platforms. Life and innovation is precious. It doesn't want to be bottled up. It thrives all on its own if you simply let it out. So if we want to understand where things are going, then we probably need to start at the beginning of the internet, that is. It was a time when anything seemed possible, but that's beginning to change. We are at a turning point where these utopian ideas and ideals are in danger of being given up on. Our digital experiences today are controlled by a handful of extremely powerful centralized technology companies and platforms, operating systems, social networks, devices. It's not how we'd imagined the future would be. And nothing says this better than a quote by Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, who calls it a large-scale emergent phenomenon which is anti-human. An ex-Google strategist says this is the largest, most standardized, most centralized form of attentional control in human history. So how did this happen? A lot of blame lies with the attention economy. The internet and the web didn't come with a payment system, or it didn't come in with a built-in store of value. We had to pay with something else. We had to pay with our attention instead. I was lucky enough to interview Dave Clark on this topic. He's one of the people who actually helped build the internet. And he told me this story about a discussion he had with an economist. And let me read it to you. The economist said, "The internet is about routing money, and routing packets is a side effect, and you screwed up the money routing protocols." Dave Clark says, "I didn't design any money routing protocols." The economist said, "That's what I mean." The attention economy has had a lot of costs. We've given up our privacy, our data. We have information overload. We're inundated with ads that are ruining our digital and online experiences. We have walled gardens which hoard our info. They wall it in, and there's different walls, and between them is the public web that's become a tragedy of the commons. Powerful algorithms influence and control us in both subtle in not so subtle ways, in ways that society itself hasn't necessarily consented to. The result is that we don't necessarily trust these platforms, and we deserve something better. We're at a fork in the road. Do we continue down the path of walled gardens, or do we have a chance to actually create something new? Can we rewild the internet, bring about the original vision of vibrant, healthy digital ecosystems for everyone? What might that look like? Let's start somewhere simple. Let's start with the topic of regulation. And I have this abstracted image of the EU and the EU flag. And I've actually used quite a lot of AI in the production of these slides. I think that's rather fitting. And the EU is really pushing hard on regulation. And with risk of oversimplifying, I'll say that they're focused on two main things: protection of personal data, so making sure that your data is a fundamental human right and control of it, and then curtailing the power of the largest corporate platforms. And that's an ongoing experiment, and I think we don't know the results of that just yet. So in all of my discussions, regulation tended to come up quite a lot, but people, to the extent that they agreed, said it's only part of the solution. It's really good at stopping what we don't want, but it doesn't necessarily create what we do want. And one of the interviewees, Daniel Goldscheider of the Open Wallet Foundation, told me no one legislated the use of the browser. People used it because they loved it. People want things that are wonderful, magical. That's why they adopt new technologies. So the question is, how do we build more of the things that we love? We need to replace this internet monoculture with something new and different in kind. A daunting task, yes, but who better to do it than the grassroots communities of open source? So it raises a very interesting question. If centralized technology platforms and the corporations that control them are the problem, is more decentralization the solution? So let's take a look at decentralized tech to try and answer that question. You could actually think of blockchain and decentralized tech as a public good. It's got built-in payments and a store of value, some of the things that we're missing in the internet. Credentials, reliable infrastructure, robust, no single corporation in control. But can it scale to billions of people? Is it agile? Is it easy enough to use? This seemed like a really promising place to start for the research. You always need a hypothesis to begin. But as often happens in a research project like this, you learn things that are new, things that are unexpected, that throws a wrench into your plans. And that was the case when I saw a really good presentation by somebody I'd never heard of, Matthew Rosenfeld. He's worked hard to build an alternative messaging system that is open and it competes with some of the biggest platforms. He said that users don't care what kind of system it is, centralized or decentralized. Instead, people want certain things from their technology. They have certain values that technology needs to answer. Things like privacy for their personal data, the ability to communicate freely, availability and reliability. They want their communication tools to be there when they need them, and they'd just like to have control over their tech. He said, centralized technologies are better to deliver this. And that's because ecosystems change quickly. He said the world of applications is always moving. And centralized systems are what allow you to be agile. It also means that things have to be simple and easy. If you're competing with the biggest players in the world, they have to be easy to use. They have to be able to be easily adopted. So for him, centralized systems were better, and that's what he chose. He goes on to say decentralized technologies have two big challenges, and I think these are worth really paying attention to. First, decentralized tech isn't agile. It's hard to reach consensus, and once you do, changes afterward are slow. And he gives the example of internet. He said, we are struggling decades later to get onto version 2. He's right, I looked it up, 44.5% are on IPv6 only. He says technologists are always biased, and since he's a technologist, I think he's probably qualified to say that. He says technologists like the idea of people operating their own infrastructure. They like to believe that everyone can be a producer and consumer of content, but that they can also be a producer and consumer of infrastructure. But he says, actually, in reality, that's not true for regular people. It's only true for technologists who like to run infrastructure. Regular people want technology to be simple. Running infrastructure is a burden. So I want us to remember both of these things because I'm going to come back to them later. They're really important points, so I want you to remember them. So decentralized technology is not agile, and running infrastructure is a burden. We need to deal with that later. But for now, let's take a quick look at some of the players who are building open and decentralized alternatives to today's centralized technology platforms. So we have a great list of robust infrastructure, some with millions of users and growing fast. And I'm not going to have a chance to go into all of them. The research paper will actually cover a lot of them in detail, but I'll just mention them really quickly. So ActivityPub, including Mastodon and Meta's threads on the left, that's an open social network. IPFS is for file sharing. Solid data pods are control of personal data. Open Matrix is actually a really good communication system that even governments are starting to adopt. Open Wallet Foundation supports identity and credentials. You may have heard of Blue Sky in the news recently. The country of Brazil basically cut off Twitter. People needed an alternative. They went to one that's open, so Blue Sky. Farcaster on the top right is a blockchain-based Twitter alternative. And then Dave Clark is involved with DSNP and Project Liberty. It combines decentralized blockchain and open source in a really interesting way. So I think you can see from this chart that open source has created a rich, vibrant, and open ecosystem that's already starting to take shape. So that's the good news. The bad news is this chart. It's a chart of quarterly visitor traffic. The challenge is that while we have some excellent technical alternatives, the dominant platforms have such a huge lead. Even everything you saw in the previous slide is in the top half of this chart. Several of the dominant platforms are on the bottom half. And so what this means is that applications with millions of views and visitors barely even register against some of these largest platforms. It's tough to compete against well-funded companies with billions of dollars at their disposal. To give you an idea of just how difficult that is, Facebook alone has invested billions of dollars. Meta in 2024 will spend $35 to $40 billion on AI infrastructure alone. So achieving feature parity is extremely difficult. But you need more than parity, because when people think about the networks they don't just want features. They want to communicate with where the people that they know are, where their friends are, where their business contacts are. So it means you need to move the needle with something even better if you're going to compete. So at this point, you may be asking, is this even possible? This sounds like a task that is not capable of being done. The resources are too limited. Well, it is possible. And the reason it's possible is because there's disruptive forces at play. Thankfully, disruption happens all the time. As Matthew Ronsfeld said, ecosystems are always moving and changing. So there's always something new and disruptive that changes the playing field, that changes the rules of the game. And if you need to be convinced of this, just think back to all of those who failed to make the changes when a disruptive technology arrived. Kodak, Blockbuster Video, Yahoo, Compaq Computer, AOL, DEC, Compaq. If you don't know some of the names of this list, and it's a very long list, it proves the point. AI is a huge source of disruption. Probably the biggest I've ever seen in my lifetime, and I've seen quite a few of these. Even the biggest players, Apple, Google, Meta, Microsoft, and many more, are all wondering how this is going to affect them. This is an existential battle. Will they manage to survive? Who will dominate the platforms of the future? And nothing is taken for granted. In 10 years, I bet many of these big companies will not exist anymore, at least not in their current forms. It throws existing platforms into chaos. What does all this chaos mean for new and competing platforms? What does it mean for open source alternatives? I don't know if you've seen Game of Thrones. I'm a big fan. In the words of Littlefinger in Game of Thrones, chaos is a ladder. Now the game begins. And because we've seen so many examples of disruptive technologies, we have a lot of mature thinking on how this plays out. And my favorite model, and there's lots of them, is that 3 horizons model for understanding technology change. I like it because it's simple and it's intuitive. And here's examples of each of these horizons and how they work. So over time, If you do nothing, you're the blue line. Your business will eventually hit a point where it's going to drop off a cliff because the disruptive technology changes the game. Then there's the second horizon. This is the green line. These companies don't fundamentally change the way they do business. They stick to what they know, but instead they take that disruptive technology and they build it into their core business. It's a great strategy, and it's one of the first ways that we see gains from any new technology. But my favorite is the third horizon. It starts out really small. This is the orange line. This is things that are fundamentally new. Someone eventually figures out what a new and disruptive technology is really good at. Maybe it allows something that used to be impossible, for example. Yet finding these new areas of application is not easy. Think of them as tiny scattered acorns or seeds. We just don't know which seeds might turn into giant oaks. Let's start with an example of a second horizon company. I'm going to pick on Apple because they've been a little bit too bold about AI itself. They've relabeled AI. Instead of artificial intelligence, they call it Apple intelligence. That's a little bit much for me. So I'm going to pick on them. So here's a look at how Apple is using AI. In typical fashion, they've decided they want to own that experience. And that's why they say AI becomes Apple intelligence. They want to own it all. Apple is sticking with the same virtues it always says it delivers: privacy and user experience. So AI is this new horizontal purple layer is going to help it do both, deal with privacy and experience. And as a user, this new AI gets to know you and your intentions really well, and it keeps that data private. The AI mediates your Apple experience to give more of what you want as needed, even pulling information from apps, helping you engage with transactions with those applications that exist on your device. So for example, let's say you plan a trip. Maybe it'll access different applications for you as you go, working with you to plan your journey the same way that an intelligent assistant would be expected to do. But I want you to remember that bottle with the plant in it. Today, if you're an app developer, that little app box, the one in the upper left there, that's your lifeline. That's your little bottle of life, how you try and innovate and survive on top of Apple's ecosystem. And if you're an app developer, that purple AI layer is sitting between you and the user. Apple plans to disintermediate you from the experience you deliver in your app. The contents of your little bottle are about to be harvested. Life will become harsher for creative app innovators. Now, if you're an Apple user, maybe it looks wonderful on the surface. Apple appears to care about your privacy. You'll get a better experience, for certain. It's also designed to appeal to regulators who will look at that secure privacy on local devices, and they're going to like that too. But remember, you'll only get a better experience on Apple's platform. Apple will lock you into its platform tighter than ever. If you like music, it's the Hotel California. You can check in anytime you want, but you can never leave. So is it really your private data if it's stuck on Apple's device? Wouldn't it be better if we could take that purple horizontal layer and remove it, take it outside of Apple's control, really make it our own instead? What if AI didn't have to live within these centralized walled gardens like Apple's? Maybe we need an alternative, something different and new. That brings us to the third horizon I mentioned earlier. If we want a third horizon innovation, we need to look at all the seeds, all the little acorns with the potential to grow into mighty oaks. We have to ask, what is this tech good for? Look at the things that used to be impossible. And remember those two objections from decentralized tech. First, that you need to be agile. Second, that running infrastructure is a burden. Let's start with agility. Maybe AI can help us with this. I interviewed Maninder Singh at MIT, and he said something I'd never heard before, that blockchain is too rigid. It's not centralized enough. Why rigid? Because blockchain has immutable data, smart contracts. You can't break the rules. Those things on blockchain that we actually like and our features. He said that full autonomy, though, even the ability to break the rules, is very human. It's how things happen in the real world. It's how we change and adapt to unforeseen circumstances. He says the available scope of our actions must be greater than rules and norms. We are allowed to break the rules. And this can be either good or bad depending on circumstances. Some rules broken are bad. If I park somewhere and I'm not supposed to, I get a parking ticket. Some can be good. If I'm driving someone to the hospital in a life or death situation, maybe it's okay to park on the sidewalk. But there's this other category if we find rules are being broken too often. Maybe either you see a lot of parking tickets in one location. Might be a good signal that the rules themselves need to change or that we need to build a new parking lot. Decentralized systems can adapt and move quickly if they're given enough autonomy. Agile and self-organizing systems can change their behavior as needed. We've never had agents or software capable of this. Software follows instructions and rules. It's deterministic. Now we have AIs and agents. True autonomy is possible, and we can have these kinds of agents easily if we want them. But what's the right balance? Too much centralization, like Apple, doesn't produce enough innovation. It's hard to grow life on it. But too much decentralization isn't great either. No coordination, chaos, and anarchy. What's the right balance? I don't know, but I'll give you one person's very interesting opinion. Stafford Beer is somebody who lived an extraordinary life. I'd never heard of him before. He used to be a consultant jetting around the world fixing supply chains. He worked in a centralized economy with Chile, trying to use computers to build a new kind of governance with more autonomy. That experiment was never fully realized. We don't know how it would have turned out. But in later years, he started talking about these concepts. And here's what he had to say about balance between the system and its parts. It is a prerequisite of viability that a system should develop maximum autonomy in its parts, where maximum is defined to mean short of threatening the integrity of the whole. I can't tell you whether he's right, but he spent a lot of time in his life trying to understand this. That's a lot less centralized than Apple and other platforms we're using today. So integrated at the core, but autonomous at the edges. Perhaps we can enjoy both. Now let's look at the second challenge. The statement of, isn't running decentralized infrastructure a burden? I agree, the average person doesn't want that. But why is it important to take control of our own infrastructure? Because we shouldn't allow ourselves to be locked in systems and platforms that aren't looking out for our interest. We should be able to use our data, continue to function without these systems. Simply put, we need more control over our technology. We need autonomy. So the point is not that you must run your own infrastructure. Most of us don't want to. Rather, it's that you can if you want to. But what if your own infrastructure got a little easier? What if, in fact, spinning up entire infrastructure and agents to manage them became trivial and effortless? AI agents can not only run, manage infrastructure, they may be able to code and tailor it too. And this is where things get really interesting. Let's take a look at a couple of third wave innovations. What might become possible when we put AI agents at the edge? I want to look at two little seedlings. Open Interpreter is one example. It's like that purple part of the Apple diagram I showed you, but it's for Linux and it belongs to you. You can put a friendlier face on open source. It's more like a full-fledged assistant than a conventional operating system. And I'd encourage you to take a look at Agent Zero. I can try and describe it, but nothing beats experimenting with it. Basically, it creates anything on the fly. Why do we need an OS or even pre-made software? Agent Zero arrives in a Docker container, and it has no limits. You're not confined to apps or operating systems. Here's how it looks, at least one view of it. Agents at the edge will be able to use any system, build anything. They can cultivate any experience for the user. That's what Agent Zero operates like. It can generate code, use tools and applications, open source. I've even tried downloading an Ethereum wallet with it. SSH into other systems, browse the web, interact with other agents. It can download a Matrix client if you ask it to. It can even break bigger tasks into smaller ones, recursively bringing up new agents to accomplish things. And maybe we can use it to pull down our information out of these centralized systems as well and store it locally. So it lets you pick your AI model, store your personal data locally, and even remember and self-reflect upon actions. It's going to change what we know about operating systems and platforms. It's the third horizon. Self-organizing agent primitives stitched together in ways that improve over time and decentralize to put back into our hands. Disruption and innovation are allies, allowing us to do what was formerly possible. These are examples of new breeds of AI agents that take action on our behalf or even self-organize. All of this is in our future, and there's a lot to be excited about. AI agents can give us back control of our network and our contacts, allowing us to traverse different systems with ease, carrying our social graph and private information with us. Imagine fluid new interfaces, tailored exclusive to you. We're all different kinds of learners. Imagine the world's best graphic AI designers, communicators, visual artists, making a UI just for you, changing the way you work, how you interact and communicate. It's a magical gateway to new possibilities. And the most important point of all is I want to say what a waste of potential the attention economy has been. Hundreds of billions spent engaging some of the smartest minds on the planet to do what? Service ads. What if we put these resources in service of something better? New recipes, blends of human and artificial intelligence that help solve the world's greatest challenges, advance science, amplify human intelligence to prepare for the future. Or another way, if we don't recognize and leverage these capabilities, we'll lose out on some of the greatest opportunities humanity has ever seen. We've only tried one recipe so far, and it hasn't been a good one. There's literally thousands of others. But I want to also deliver a warning. Amongst these third horizon companies, there's powerful platforms that want to bottle things up. Don't let them. Access to AI and open AI at the edges is important. It's a human right. It's something that we all deserve. It's too important to our future and humanity's future to have closed AI. Today, we see the first outlines of our future. Technology can serve society instead of the other way around. We've never had the opportunity to build algorithms optimized for us before. It's time to try 1,000 new recipes, integrated at the core, autonomous at the edges, just like open source. We know a better future is in sight, and the brilliant and talented people in this room are more than qualified to help build it. We just have to walk through the door and into the beautiful wild garden on the other side. Thank you. Shishi.